SRX is the best way to have fun in motor racing because we're trying to take the car out of the equation and really allow people to see the driver talent and driver personalities. We're going to have drivers that are going to be racing against drivers they may never get the chance to race against. This is about athletes, it's about sports, it's about that competition. We're going to run on paved ovals, we're going to run on dirt ovals. We want to find out who the best driver is and make them adapt.
"12 superstars of racing, 6 iconic tracks, 700 horsepower. I'm Alan Bestwick. This is SRX, the game."
Today we're taking a look at a new game, SRX, the game. This game is based on Tony Stewart's new racing series, Superstar Racing Experience. The game is developed and published by Monster Games. Monster Games worked on the NASCAR Heat series through Heat 4, and last year made Tony Stewart's Sprint Car Racing, and then Tony Stewart's All-American Racing. Like the previous games made by Monster Games, this game is built on Unity, and will look quite familiar to those who have played their previous games, even going back to NASCAR Heat. So, I've been meaning to make this video for a while now, but I wasn't quite sure about everything I wanted to say for this video and had to keep putting more time into the game to complete all my thoughts on it. SRX the game was released on Friday, May 28th for $39.99. The game is available on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC via Steam. There is no physical copy for the game, it is currently only available digitally. The game features 16 SRX licensed drivers: Marco Andretti, Greg Biffle, Brian Brown, Helio Castroneves, Doug Coby, Bill Elliott, Ernie Francis Jr., Tony Kanaan, Bobby Labonte, Willie T. Ribbs, Bobby Santos III, Scott Speed, Tony Stewart, Kobe Swanson, Paul Tracy, and Michael Waltrip. All 6 of the tracks for the inaugural season of SRX are present, and those are Eldora, Knoxville, Lucas Oil, Nashville Fairgrounds, Slinger, and Stafford. There are an additional 45 fantasy dirt tracks of varying type, including road courses. Additionally, they released an update to allow you to race the SRX cars on an additional 12 of the fantasy dirt tracks, in addition to the 6 real-life tracks. The settings menu is pretty much the same as their previous games, but unlike all their previous games, they did spell brake correctly this time around. However, like all their previous games, the brake pedal is still too sensitive. My wheel was recognized and had all the controls mapped to it. It even mapped controls for my TH8A shifter that isn't being run through my wheelbase, which was something that did surprise me a little. If you don't like the default button mapping, there is a menu on PC to change them. There is still no mouse support on PC, but you can use a keyboard, sort of? I complained about this in Tony Stewart's All-American Racing, and it's still a problem, so I'm going to complain about it now too. The button labels for wheels and keyboard is really subpar, and if you have a wheel with normal console button labels, if you have a wheel with Xbox button labels, you're fine. But if you don't have a wheel with standard Xbox button labels, good luck finding out what button is A, B, X, Y, or any of the other standard Xbox buttons, because they still don't have proper button labels for wheels or even a keyboard if you start using a keyboard, making this game difficult to navigate. Even if you're using a PlayStation PC wheel, the button labels don't change the PlayStation labels like most games. The tire wear settings is kind of a little weird. The options are none, less, normal, and more. And I say this is a little weird because it's hard to know where exactly to set tire wear for a shorter race to still get a realistic feel, as if it were a full race. With NASCAR Heat, they had 1x, 2x, 3x, and so on. So if you were doing a 25% race and wanted realistic tire wear, you simply set it to 4 times. And it even tells you this in the settings description. I think they simplified it with this game because there aren't pit stops, but the problem is I don't know how to set tire wear for shorter races. If I set it to more for a 50 or 75% race, is it going to be too much? How much is more? However, after having done a 100% race with tire wear set to normal, you definitely could feel it at the end of the race. For 25% races, it was kind of hit or miss on how much tire wear fall off you felt. At Slinger and Stafford, it was quite noticeable, and that was probably due to my horrible driving, but at Lucas Oil, I didn't really notice that much fall off. You can create a custom car for any of the 4 series, including SRX. The custom car menus are very similar to previous Monster Game titles, but there are a couple of small differences. You can select different designs for the side and top of the car, and then sponsor logos and numbers can be scaled, rotated, and moved along an X and Y axis. Now, this isn't a groundbreaking full customizable paint booth like some people want, but it is nice to see them add features to create more customization, but I still feel like they could be doing more. And so that being said, I would like to see more designs added at some point, even if this were in the form of a paid DLC, because it will at least give you more options, and if you don't care about custom cars, then you don't have to buy it. In my first race at Lucas Oil, I was able to finish second in the first heat after losing the lead in the final corner, and then 4th in the second heat, and so I started the main race 4th and ended up finishing 4th. I never really felt like I had the pace for 1st or 2nd, but I had a good battle with Scott Speed for 3rd, but kept making too many mistakes to be able to get a spot from him. At Eldora, I did some practice and initially found the practice goal time of a 16:01 was hard to reach at first, but after a couple of laps, I was able to pick up the pace a little and even dip into the 15.7s, but was overall not very consistent. To my surprise, though, I won both heats and the main. Once I got the lead, there wasn't really too much of a battle with the AI. The AI was right there behind me the whole main race, but I never really felt comfortable. Like I could just relax and drive away with it. But I never really felt a ton of pressure either. I was actually really surprised with how much pace I had in the race after the race at Lucas Oil and my inconsistent practice times. But at Stafford, I never reached the practice goal and just felt completely off the pace. I was capable of rallying to a 6th place finish after wrecking in the second heat and starting the main last. Then at Nashville, I once again had no pace at all in practice. But then a whole different me showed up to the heats and I picked up a pair of 3rds and then a 4th in the main. Slinger is where my lack of talent definitely showed up. I got an 8th after spinning out a 5th with 10 laps to go. I was incredibly inconsistent at this track. At Knoxville, I was able to finish 2nd, but again, never really had the pace to win. Overall, the AI sort of run multiple lines. They tend to prefer either the top or the bottom at a particular track. Usually the bottom. SRX is always the bottom. The AI will usually try to go for that line, but if they have to, they'll run side by side, but they don't really hunt around for different lines. If set properly, the AI aren't just pushovers. They can be tough, and they generally know where you are and won't just plow into you. They'll give you room. The AI will even make mistakes. I've had cars spin right in front of me. The AI will wreck other AI. I've even had the AI spin another AI right into me. When an AI car spins by themselves, it doesn't really look that natural, but hey, at least Monster Games tried. This is something that I've criticized the Heat series for. The AI there just feels like they're too perfect and are just running on rails, so it's really nice to see them implement something like this in SRX. I just would have also liked to see the AI hunt around for different grooves more. The contact physics between cars was pretty bad in All American Racing. If you touched another car, you would usually get stuck to that car, and it was hard to get separated. This is improved between cars, but hitting the wall sometimes will just suck the car in, and it's hard to get off. I've ridden the wall for half a lap before being able to finally turn the car off it. This is mostly notable in the 305s and late models, which makes sense because these came from the previous games where this was more of an issue. Monster Games claims the top is much more usable than previous games. They said this though with Tony Stewart's All-American Racing, but I never really found that to be all that true. But after having done just 2 races at 2 tracks, I found that this to definitely be more true. At Lucas Oil, I felt the bottom was the preferred lane, but you could use the second groove if done right. At Eldora in practice, I was able to make time up on cars in front and pass them on the top. But I think all the laps that I set that met the goal time were on the bottom. I started the first heat in 6th and went to the front on the outside. In the 305 at Jacobs County, I had no pace at all on the bottom, but then I moved up to the top and was able to improve and meet the practice goal and go on to win the race. On Tony Stewart's All-American Racing, if you started on the outside and couldn't get to the bottom, you'd get freight trained, and you just couldn't use the top. Monster Games also claims that you can't just flat-foot it around the track, and that you have to work the gas pedal more. I'm not totally sold on this. I do think it's better, but SRX at Eldora, I mostly flat-footed it, but then at Knoxville, I did have to work the throttle a little. It just seems a little hit or miss, but it is better than before. There's a chase camera, bumper camera, hood camera, and driver camera. There's still no customization options with these cameras like an FOV slider, but I will say this, the driver camera is so much better than the super zoomed out driver camera from NASCAR Heat. The NASCAR Heat camera almost felt like you were sitting in the back seat of the car. I felt like I was faster using the hood camera, as that's what I'm used to with these games, but I felt the driver camera made me more consistent and make less mistakes. Particularly with SRX and the stadium trucks, I actually preferred the hood camera for the sprint cars and late models though. The game does have day to night transitions in between the different races, but when you go into the replay at the end of the main race, it will start with the first race of the event, but the lighting stays the same as the main race. It doesn't go back to being lighter, even though it was lighter when you did the race. It's kind of weird. There's a championship mode where you can select a regulation season or pre-selected shorter season. You can't create a custom championship though. Along with not being able to select a custom championship, currently the SRX Dirt Championship now includes all the regulation dirt tracks along with fantasy tracks now. There's no option to run just the regulation dirt tracks. You can do multiple championships at once, which is nice, unlike career mode where you're still limited to just one career mode save. One area I find really disappointing, but not all that surprising, is this game makes no improvements into the pre- and post-race presentation. Similarly to previous titles, when you first enter the track menu for practice, you're greeted with your car in a garage with no one around. But you get audio from the PA system, this time from a more familiar voice of Alan Bestwick. Upon entering the race, you are greeted with a shot of the cars on the pace laps, followed by a shot of your car with the camera panning around it. After the race ends, you get a pop-up of your finishing position while the race replay begins to play in the background before being taken to the race results screen. There is no victory celebration when you win a race, which makes working hard for a win a little anticlimactic in my opinion. The 305 sprint cars were in Tony Stewart's Sprint Car Racing, and Tony Stewart's All-American Racing had dirt late models. Monster Games claims to have improved these cars. So what I did was I raced each car once on the old game, and then immediately after I raced the same car on SRX on the same track. I used Knoxville because it is the only track that I know is in all three games. The late models don't really feel that different to me from All-American Racing. I really couldn't find anything notable that was different. The 305s, on the other hand, were noticeably different. Now, not groundbreaking, but different. In the sprint car games, the cars felt very floaty and just gliding over the track. There was very little in the way of force feedback, and I couldn't find a modeled cushion along the top of the track. With the SRX game, the 305s do have a little bit more force feedback, making them easier to drive, and there is a cushion along the top of the track. There's a 25-player online multiplayer along with local split screen. Career mode requires you to work your way up to reach SRX, having you start in 305 sprint cars, then stadium trucks, and then dirt late model. This is nice and different than the previous games where you just bought a car and raced in any series. There's actually a progression and a goal you're trying to achieve in this career mode, and that's the SRX series. My favorite part of this game is the SRX cars, especially on pavement. I would have liked to have seen more pavement options for the other series, especially since SRX is half dirt, half pavement. I find it kind of disappointing there is no pavement outside of the SRX cars. The addition of a pavement late model, or say modified, would have been great, as this is my favorite part of the game, and when I say this is my favorite part of the game, this came as a surprise to me. Having played all the previous NASCAR Heat titles that were developed by Monster Games, short track racing was always in my top 3 things I hated about every one of those games. So I truly was surprised with how good the short track pavement racing is in SRX. It's really come a long way from the NASCAR Heat days. Is SRX the game worth it? Well, that's a tricky question. The game is clearly targeted at a more casual audience on console using a gamepad. That being said, I don't think this game is as arcadey as some people may think, and even though I do think it's more targeted to gamepad users, it does a fair job at supporting wheels outside of having proper button labels. I honestly think $40 though is a little much in my opinion, and I definitely think the SRX series with all the licensing is what drove the price up. As I said, the late models don't feel that improved to me. The 305s are slightly improved, but nothing groundbreaking. The only true new content is the stadium trucks and SRX. But what I find kind of disappointing is that, in my mind, what this game does best, there's so little of, and that's the pavement racing. If you're looking for a dirt racing game and don't have Tony Stewart's All-American Racing, I would honestly recommend that, because that game is cheaper. It's not that this game is bad, but I feel that there's more there with that game and those cars for dirt racing. The All-American Racing game is just a better value, in my opinion. If you already have the All-American game and were wondering if this game is worth it, it's kind of hard to say. I personally don't think that they did enough improvements from the previous game, having run the late models right after each other at the same track. They felt almost identical. The 305s are definitely improved, but it's nothing huge. Essentially half the game feels recycled to me. And this is the most expensive of the 3 games in the Tony Stewart series. I would have been happier if they replaced the late models and or 305s with the pavement series to add more of that aspect into the game. But this would have been more work for Monster Games because they would have had to build a new physics model for whatever pavement car they added. But having it be something different would help justify the $40 price tag to me. Monster Games continues to put all their focus into the driving aspect of their games, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I spend more time just practicing in games like R Factor 2 and Assetto Corsa Competizione instead of actually racing, because the driving experience in those games is so good and I'm constantly trying to get better. But with Monster Games, they're not trying to be a sim, and so the way I'm seeing it though, they're focusing everything on the driving experience at the expense of almost everything else within the game. The pre and post race presentation is almost the same, even going back to the Heat series. The settings are pretty much the same as Heat 4, and it's not the layout that bothers me. My complaint is the lack of improved setting options, like graphic tuning options, FOV sliders, and proper button labels. It's the lack of improvements in the car customization menu. Outside of logo resizing and movement along a fixed X and Y axis, it's pretty much the same thing we've had since the Heat series. There's no time trial mode, just like NASCAR Heat when Monster Games was in charge of developing that series. I mean, you can't even do something as simple as drive a track with no other cars. My point is, they changed the main menu layout, reskin the UI, and work on driving physics. That's all that really is changing with these games. Some aspects of the game haven't been touched and improved on in 4 games. I said earlier that half the content for this game was recycled, but I was just talking about the cars. It's actually so much more if you look at the way the game does everything, from the menus to settings to presentation. It's not bad to keep the same layout and style, but there's basic things that are still missing after 4 games. And the question is, are these concerns ever going to be addressed? Because it seems Monster Games has zero interest in changing the player experience outside of car handling and physics. And that's a big part of this game, but there's more to this game, especially since it's not a sim. But even then, the improved physics are only minimally improved. The more games Monster Games pumps out without addressing their lack of basic features makes me wonder how much they actually care about making good games that people want to play, as much as they care about bringing in as much money as possible. I understand that Monster Games is a business and they need to make money. I also understand they're a small company and don't have all the resources in the world. But the point is, they've put out 3 games in 15 months with almost no improvement in the core features of those games outside of driving. If they don't have the resources, they shouldn't be pushing out 3 games in 15 months. Don't just make a game to make a game. Make a game because it's going to be good. Codemasters, for example, and I know they're a large company and they have a ton of resources now, but that's not really the point. But they spend 2 years making F1 games now. I'm not saying these games need to be as good as F1, but the point is that you can't usually make a game overnight. You actually have to put some time and effort into actually making improvements. Yes, SRX is a better driving experience. They did a lot of things right with this game. The new cars are a great addition to be able to have in a game, and the pavement racing is really enjoyable. The ability for you, the player, to run multiple lines is improved. The AI is improved. But rather than bring a game with 4 new vehicles like the previous games, we only get 2 new vehicles and 2 recycled cars with small improvements. And then recycled game modes, settings, and UI with almost no improvements. It's honestly just kind of frustrating. So now, you've heard from me, and now I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on SRX the game? Thanks for watching, and until next time, so long everybody.